Hi, I'm Debbie and welcome to Book and Bujo, where I talk about all things book, bullet journals, and stationery. Today I'm going to go through all the books I read and didn't read in February. I chapter all of my videos, so those of you who like to hear about the stats, stay tuned, they're up next. But if you really just want to hear about the books, feel free to skip ahead. Let's talk stats. So for my star ratings, I had 0 1-star and 0 2-star, which is beautiful. It's always nice not to have any lower rated books. I did have 1 3-star. I had 11 4-stars, some of which were 4.5 stars, and I had 1 5-star. So it was a really good reading month. For demographics, I had 4 young adult books and 9 adult books. I read 13 books total. So I read 1 short story and 1 novella, and the rest, the other 11, were standard novels. I started 5 new series. Not sure why, but started 5 new series, but I did continue 4 other series. Now for genre, I did have 1 gothic horror, I had 2 nonfictions, 1 sci-fi, 1 classic, and 8 fantasy. Where I sourced my books, so I got 5 from the library, I did borrow 4, and then I owned 4 of them, which was good. More books reading off my TBR, owned TBR. For book type, so I did listen to 154 hours worth of audiobooks, which is actually down from last month. And I read 5,261 pages, also down. Now, of course, it is February, so there's a few less days in the month than normal. So I listened to 5 audiobooks, I read 4 ebooks, and 2 mixed media books. So I listened to the audiobook and read the ebook at the same time. So publication dates was anywhere from 1925 to 2022. So I did read 2 from 1987, and those were the Discworld books. And then I also read 2 from 2012 and 2 from 2022. The rest of them were just 1 book from each year. All right, so as always, I have my handy dandy cheat sheet in my reading journal here. So how did I do in February? Not too bad. I finished more than I thought I was going to finish when I did my TBR Opoly, so that's good. Still didn't quite get everything on there, but I did finish my TBR Opoly itself from from February. So first roll was a Pop Sugar Challenge, and that was to read a book with mythical creatures. So originally I was going to read Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, the 3rd book in the Dark Artifices series, and then I realized that the Shadowhunter read-along is pushed back a month, so that book will be for March instead of February. So I got a pass on that one, and I ended up moving up one of my other books instead that I needed to read. So I ended up swapping it out with Knightmare Arcanist, which is the 1st book in the Frith Chronicles by Shami Stovall, and I did read that. I actually really enjoyed it. So Knightmare Arcanist is about a gentleman named Volk who has dreamed about becoming an arcanist and bonding with the mythical creatures. So the island that he lives on, they tend to bond with a phoenix. So that would be pretty cool. So he's apprenticed to a gravedigger along with another apprentice, and they've kind of been grown up together for quite a while. They consider themselves brother and sister, even though they're not actually related. But gravediggers are looked down upon on their island, and they aren't really allowed to bond with the phoenixes. So he does have 1 chance though, because they do a trial. Depending on how many phoenixes are available, this time there was only 2. The school chooses the apprentices that will get to go through the trial and then become bonded with the phoenixes. So in this case, there was 2 other people that were trying to become bonded. But there's no rule that says that others can't just join in the trial. It's just looked down upon at this point, because it's tradition now that the school chooses who gets to bond. So what does Volk do? Of course, he crashes the trial and jumps on in and tries to be able to be the one that bonds with the Phoenix. The characters are interesting, a little two-dimensional, so I did give it 4 stars. I really liked the interaction between all of the characters, and a couple of the side characters were also kind of intriguing and interesting. I look forward to seeing how the books progress through the series. I would definitely continue reading it because it was really fun. The plot was fleshed out well. Like I thought it progressed well through the story. It was a little predictable. Like I was able to guess fairly early on what was going to happen at the end. But I kind of think the author intended that a little bit. I could be wrong. The writing style was really easy to read, though definitely geared towards the younger side of YA. And the artwork is stunning. Loved it. Next roll was an even, and that was to read a book you forgot you owned. And for that, I read Gate of Air, the Dragon Gods series, the first book by Resa Nelson. I also gave this one 4 stars. It was really good. So in Gate of Air, the Northland gods are not happy. They have told Freyka, the main character, that they will destroy everyone unless she can convince the dragon gods from the Far East to appease them, because they feel like the dragon gods have taken over and none of their people follow the Northland gods anymore. So this is a historical fantasy. This is a historical fantasy with mythology and a coming-of-age trope. I feel like this book excels at magical realism without all of the info dumps that you typically get, especially with more of like a historical fiction book. So it doesn't have so much just thrown at you all in one page just to kind of get through it. It kind of spreads it out a little bit more and has you just kind of assume some things and figure them out as you go. So we mainly follow Freyka, our main character, but we also get additional POVs throughout the story, which was nice. The atmosphere, I think, is done really well, and the culture really shines through, especially in the Far East portions of the book, as well as showing the differences between the two nations, between the Northlanders and the Far Easterners. There are a couple of interesting twists in the story that has me definitely wanting to carry on with the series. The writing style was really easy to read, and the prose, I think, in the story was done really well. The characters are also written well, although don't always agree with their choices. But that's good, because it creates a more interesting book. The main character can seems a little dense at times, but I think that's the intention of the author. We'll see how the story progresses, if that's the case or not. My favorite character is most definitely Gran. Oh my gosh, I love her. She was hilarious. Not sure if there's a whole lot else I could say. It's just that hands down, best character of the book. She was great. Absolutely loved her. This first book is definitely laying down the groundwork for the rest of the series, and I definitely look forward to seeing where it goes from here. All right, so the next role was Everflame, which is the first book in the Everflame series by Dylan Lee Peters. And this was my 3-star of the month. So we follow 2 main storylines in Everflame. The first one is of Evercloud, who was saved by a bear in the Bear Kingdom and grew up among the bears in the Bear Kingdom. And the other one is Edgar, who grew up in the Human Kingdom. So in the beginning, there were 4 main creatures called the Ancients, and they created everything, including the Great Tyrant, who then chased them away. And as the world loses their connection with the Ancients, they start to live in fear and start to forget the old ways and start accepting the lies that the Great Tyrant tells them. So I did really like the color of the book, the simplicity of it. The story was interesting, and I think there was a good plot to it, but it just didn't grab me, and I was trying to figure out why. I'm not sure why I wasn't really invested in the characters, although there are some that I found interesting. I think I got a little more invested toward the end of the book, but it was like the last quarter of the book where I should have been invested a lot sooner in them. Overall, I just didn't really care what happened one way or another, which is weird because it's fantasy and mythology and mythical creatures, which is usually something I love, but I think it just read too young for me. The formatting of the book was more had a more of a middle grade look to it. And even the first section, so there was like 3 parts to the book. The first part we're following Evercloud and his story within the Bear Kingdom, and that whole portion of the book read very middle grade to me. And then we moved on to Edgar and his storyline in Amongst the Human World, which read more YA to me, maybe even closer to new adult in the concepts of it. So there was a viciousness in some of the content of it in the human world that didn't hold up as well with the middle grade and YA feel that was the book. It felt a little more new adult and adult. So I think that threw me off a bit. So the last portion of the book I connected with a little bit more, and I felt that read a little more new adult. So what it felt like to me is that somebody came up with a story in middle grade. In their English class, they had to write a story. And then they liked the concept of it, so when they got into high school, they decided to add a little more to it, doing a little tweaking. And then in college, they decided to revisit it again and added a little more to it, but never really put all 3 parts of it together with the same age group in mind. I'm not sure if that makes any sense at all, but yes, it was a middle grade YA new adult mashup that didn't quite work for me. It was good, it was interesting. If I got the next book for free and I had time, I may read it, but I'm not going to go out of my way to find it. Next up was an odd card that was read a book with a green cover, and for that I read The Great Hunt, which is the second book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. So The Great Hunt is a high epic fantasy where we are continuing to follow Rand and his friends from the 2 rivers on their quest. So 2 of my favorite things in fantasy books are character building and world building, and this book has them both, most especially the world building. It's just beautiful. So I think that my favorite character in this book so far is actually one of the side characters, Loial, and he really reminds me of, so if you could do a mashup of a Hobbit and Treebeard from the Lord of the Rings series, that is the vibes that I get from Loial. He's so great. I love him. But the other 2 characters that I really enjoy and wish I could get more of, but they're also side characters. Not sure why my favorite characters are side characters in this story, but regardless. But I really love Lon and Min, and they are really interesting. I really like Lon's character, and Min is just so interesting. I can't wait to find out more about her and how she's going to fit in with the group on a whole. It was nice to see her back again. So the pacing does pick up a little bit in this book. The first one was a lot slower paced. This book is a little bit a skosh faster. We're still not sprinting. We're still on a nice stroll, but we've started walking just a little bit faster because we see something interesting we want to see, so we're picking up our pace just a bit. That's kind of how I feel about the pacing of this book. I did thoroughly enjoy this one. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I can't wait to get into the next book. Next up was an even card, which was dragon or fire on the cover, and for that I chose Memories of Ice, the 3rd book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. So as this is the 3rd book in the series, there's only so much I can say about it without giving away any spoilers. We're continuing to follow the Panan Domin and the uneasy alliance that resists its reign. This is a powerhouse book that holds nothing back and gives everything it has. I can see why people think Deadhouse Gates and Memories of Ice are 2 of the most loved books in the series. They were both so good. I'm still trying to decide if I like Deadhouse Gates or Memories of Ice better. Not sure. Love them both. So if you're a fan of a darker epic fantasy that's full of war and complex characters and amazing world building and the interactions between the characters, then this is definitely a series for you. It can be a little confusing going in the first time, but there are so many great chats and live shows and a whole bunch of things on Reddit that are there to help you through. So after the Gardens of the Moon, the first book, I was really confused about what was going on. There's so many there's so many characters, there's so many names, and I was able to hop on to a live show that had a couple of veterans that have, this is their second or third time through the series, and it was nice, without giving away any spoilers, they kind of helped us along to get us up to speed and figure out what was going on. So it was great. I will definitely be rereading this series in 2024. So if you're looking for a book where you can just slap on the audiobook and go about your day and do whatever you want to do and just kind of have it on in the background, yeah, this is not that kind of book. This is one of those books where you want to sit down and you want to have the audiobook on, you want to have the physical book in your hand, you want to be following along on the page as well as in your ear, and really just immerse yourself in the world. 4.5 stars. Highly recommend. So my last roll for my TBR Opoly was an even card, and I got Quiet, the Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. So I had started reading this book a few years ago with my husband, and we are both introverts. It was really nice to have a book from the introvert's perspective. We got about halfway through the book, and then life happened and we never really got back to it. And so I was really glad when this card got pulled back up in my TBR Opoly game, because I really enjoyed this book. So Susan Cain in Quiet discusses how introverts are undervalued in a world that gravitates towards extroverts. She wants us to be able to value introverts for who they are, the amazing people that they are, and what they have to bring to the table. So she gives us lots of examples and stories, but also has clinical studies to back up the different things that she says as well. She gives us examples of some famous introverts in history, like Rosa Parks and quite a few others, and the ways that they were able to contribute to the world in their more quiet, behind-the-scenes way. She also wants introverts to be able to see themselves differently, to see themselves as valuable, and not just this quiet person who wants to be by themselves all the time. I think there's a lot of really useful things in this book. So she has examples of like a married couple that's an introvert and an extrovert that have issues because the extrovert is seeing what the introvert is doing through extrovert eyes, and vice versa, instead of understanding what the other person's personality is like and why they are the way they are. So why the extrovert wants to have a party every Friday and see his friends, where the wife is an introvert, and by the time they get home from work on Friday, they're tired, they're drained, they're wiped out. Last thing they want to do is interact with more people. So being able to come to some kind of compromise and realize that just because the introvert doesn't want to go to the party doesn't mean that they don't like the extrovert. And the introvert needs to realize that the extrovert doesn't want to go to the party alone because they love spending time with their spouse and they want them there with them, and they get energy and love from that person, and they want to share that with all their friends too. So being able to come up with some kind of compromise, instead of having a party every week, maybe they only do it twice a month. So instead of having that be a point of dissension where the relationship may fall apart, they use that as a learning moment and how to grow even closer together. So there's lots of examples, just real life examples, like workplace ones, relationship ones, friendship ones, and it was a great book. I'm really glad I read it. That's another one I gave 4.5 stars to, and I highly recommend it if you are an introvert, if you know of an introvert, if you work with one, if you're married to one, if you have one in your life. I highly recommend this book. So next up, I pulled a book from my TBR jar, which was The Siren by Kiera Cass. I did not read that. I decided that it was more important to read the books that were on my TBR Opoly and to read the books for readalongs and book clubs and things like that before this. So this is going back in my TBR jar for another time. So for my D20 roll, I did roll that for February, and that was Gate of Air, which I doubled up with one of my other prompts, so that was good. I did read that one. For Buzz Wordathon, I chose The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, which was also one of my TBR Opoly rolls, and that was for a verb in the title, and so hunt is a verb. And then Amazon Borrows, I rolled a 7, and that was Knightmare Arcanist, which I also chose for my TBR Opoly. And then for my Readathons, Adventures in Aeldia, for Ariel, she was supposed to go to the forest, a book with trees on the cover, And for that I chose A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It's the first book in the Monk and the Robot series. And oh my gosh, that was adorable. Such a feel-good, just warm the heart story. The storyline itself is somewhat middle grade, but it was definitely written for adults. So popping some language in there and some adult content, but oh, it was just so heartwarming and feel good, and I loved it. It was a great read and a nice palate cleanser after reading all of these high epic fantasies that I'm reading. So I highly recommend it. So good. This is actually my first Becky Chambers book. It also gave me Tea Dragon vibes. So the Tea Dragon Society books, which are also just heartwarming. It gave me those vibes and loved it. Loved it. Highly recommend. And then for Karasu, my other character for Adventures in Aeldia, he had to go in a cave, nothing but words on the cover, and for that I chose Quiet, the Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. So the other read-alongs I participated in was Polarthon. How did I do with that? Well, I had my first roll, and the roll was Ice and Snow, and I read Memories of Ice by Stephen Erikson. I immediately regretted my choice when I realized why am I reading like a 900-page book for a week-long readathon? Well, I did finish it, and I got my second roll, and that was Animal Friends, and so I was reading Knightmare Arcanist, which I got about 30% of the way through before the end of the Polarthon. But I loved both books and enjoyed reading them both. So the other one I was sort of participating in was a series and TBR Bingo with Lotti's Library, and that was for the full month, and that one had 9 different prompts. I did read 7 of the prompts. One of them was a free space, so there was no book there. So I was able to fit 7 of my books from my TBR into the series and TBR Bingo, and there was 1 free space and then 1 that I did not do. It was to finish off a series, and I most definitely did not finish off any, but I did start 5, so what you gonna do? All right, for my book clubs and read-alongs. So my Shadowhunter book club, again, we basically were reading Lord of Shadows this month because everything got pushed back or pushed ahead just a little bit, and I had already read Lord of Shadows in January, so I took a pass on that one this month. For Wheel of Time, I did read The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. For my Malazan read-along, we were reading Memories of Ice, the 3rd book in the series, which I did read. And then for First Lawalong, it was The Blade Itself. That was the book for January and February, and I did read that in January. That's by Joe Abercrombie. And then Around the Disc with Literary Diversions, we are reading Equal Rights and Mort by Terry Pratchett, the 3rd and 4th book in the Discworld series, and those were so much fun. I loved the perspectives in both of the books. So I think that a lot of the books in the Discworld series also have kind of spin-offs that kind of go, so you have the Death series, the Witches series. I don't really know a whole lot about the Terry Pratchett Discworld series. I'm only up to book 4, and there's like, what, 41, 42 books in the series? So Equal Rights has a wizard that, at the beginning, that needs to give his staff to another wizard because he is dying, and his particular staff is supposed to go to the 8th son of an 8th son. So he goes to an 8th son who has 7 sons, and his wife is getting ready to give birth as he comes in, and instead of checking to see that it was a son, he just gives the staff and then leaves, and then voila, there is a daughter. What are you gonna do? So I really enjoyed this one. The humor in these books is amazing, and the talent that Terry Pratchett has for taking tough issues and making them entertaining in a good way. Basically going through some of these tough issues without all of the bias and emotion that goes into it that can become heated and make people angry. He does it in more of a lighthearted way that still gets the point across, which that is an amazing talent to have, and he does it really well. This book is tackling like feminism and stereotypes, and do wizards always have to be men? Can it be a female? You know, can a woman be a wizard? Can a girl become a wizard and be trained up like a wizard? Well, she has this staff now. Is she a wizard or is she a witch? Can you not be both? Granny Weatherwax is amazing. She stole the book for me. She was great. What a fun character. I love her. So I am definitely a Terry Pratchett fan. Now, Mort, even more fun. So this is, I believe, the first book in the Death series where we follow Death himself. So Death is choosing an apprentice and he chooses Mort. And then we follow the craziness that ensues in being apprentice of Death. Next up is the Cosmere read-along, where we are continuing with the Stormlight Archives, and it's The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. This book is so good. Wow. So I have read, for Brandon Sanderson, I think this is pretty much the third series that I'm reading. So I started off with the Mistborn series, the first three, and then I read Elantris, which I also liked. You could tell it was one of his first books because they keep getting better from there. And then this one, hands down, I feel like just like blew away all the others. So good. Love all of the characters, even the ones you don't really like because you're not supposed to like them, right? So the Stormlight Archives is a high epic fantasy that takes place in Roshar, and we follow 4 main characters and their points of view. So the world isn't what it used to be. There was victory, then it was lost. Maybe victory isn't what they thought it was. To find it again, one of the 4 may redeem us. But then again, one may destroy us all. I don't know if you really need to know more than that. There's so many, just the quotes in this book that are good that you want to write down and highlight and annotate. And yes, there's so much in this book. The characters are all great. The Way of Kings worked on so many levels. To start with, the characters. So well written. They all had depth. They had emotions. They had reasons for doing things. They were truly living and going through whatever life threw at them, for good or bad. They weren't just hiding or giving up or letting someone else take control. They were stepping up to whatever life threw at them. Sometimes needing a little encouragement from a friend to do it. The atmosphere, so immersive. I could feel like I was there with the Bridge Runners. I felt like I was there in the library with Shallan, and just feeling Dalinar put his armor on and the weight of that, the actual weight, and then also just the emotional and mental weight that comes with the responsibility of that armor. The writing style was beautiful, yet it was really easy to read. It was easy to follow. I did listen to it and read the ebook at the same time. Which I think helped. The magic system was unique and interesting, and I feel like the plot drove the story forward. The pacing at times was a little slow, because, slaves are marching from one place to another. They're not necessarily at a jog, getting ready to go, but there are a lot of battle scenes here and there intermixed in that helped to keep the pace a little more steady throughout the whole book, even though there was some ups and downs. And I was so intrigued with this book that it was hard to put down. I wanted to be listening and reading to it at all times. And again, my 2 favorite things to read about in a book, character driven and world building. This book has them both. And everything else about the world that was amazing was just kind of the cherry on top, which made this book my 5-star read for the month and is one of my top 10 for the year so far. For the Howling Pack book club, we read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. Already talked about that one. So cute, heartwarming, loved it. And for the Full Moon book club, we read Man-Made Monsters by Andrea L. Rogers. And this one was interesting. So I didn't really know much about it when I was going into it. Didn't realize it was a collection of short stories. Not a fan of short stories. Once you start getting into a character, the story's over and now you have all new sets of characters and everything to get to know. The biggest thing I don't like about short stories. But this one, you actually follow the same family throughout the centuries. So at first I was a little confused. I'm like, wait, isn't this the same person? No, it's not the same person, but it's the same names. Is this the same family? Like, what is going on? So I actually stopped and read the synopsis of the book, which I don't like doing. I like to go in blind to basically most of the books that I read. So I went and read the synopsis and that helped. I was like, oh, okay, it's a short story. It's following the same family from throughout the ages. Got it. Okay, so then I went back in. And so as I first started reading, the stories were really good, but I was kind of getting 3-star vibes just because of the short story and a little bit of confusion at the beginning. But by the time I ended the book, it was definitely a 4-star book. It was really interesting. There was even books like Into the Future, like 2039 and beyond. They were really interesting. Like they had a sci-fi element. The rest of the book, well, the whole book is pretty much a gothic horror. So you have werewolves, you have vampires, and a lot of the funness of the gothic horror. And then you also get the Cherokee history in there, which I loved. So I grew up in northern Arizona in the Navajo reservation area, and most of my friends lived on the reservation. And I know some of the Navajo history, but I don't really know a lot about the history that's not in the area I grew up in. So it was nice to see some of the Cherokee history in there and getting to know some other tribes and the way people grew up that was very different from my own. So the building of the culture, not only that they were in at the time, but of their past culture, was beautifully done. And the horror element of this book was really good. Like basically feeling as you're reading it that someone is watching you from the side, like gives you those vibes like, is there someone, I feel like somebody's watching me, but you turn around, there's nobody there. That's kind of the vibes of this book. It was great. Loved it. Thank you to Jan Agaton with the Full Moon Book Club for this pick this month. Oh, and the artwork throughout the book. Every chapter heading had new artwork for it. It was beautifully done, and the cover is amazing. So next up is the J&R Book Club, and for that we are reading Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Julie Smith, and I am actually about halfway through that book. It's definitely 4.5 star vibes for me, and I'm really enjoying it. So it's a nonfiction, and it's basically a therapist's point of view, and how a lot of people at the end of therapy are like, why had no one told me this before? Like, I could have had a much more productive life before this if I had known some of these coping mechanisms and being able to recognize what was going on before I downward spiraled and kind of lost control. So I'm actually learning quite a bit, and I'm glad someone is telling me this so I don't have to say, why has nobody told me this before? Especially for anyone who deals with low self-esteem, low mood, depression, people going through grief, having struggles with grieving the loss of a family member, the loss of a dream, the loss of a job, the loss of a friend. Great book. I think it has some really good information in there for you. And then last up was my classic book, which I read, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This again was another amazing palette cleanser. So I feel like this book was written in the Jane Austen style. Yeah, those are the vibes I got from the book. So by the end of the book, I was kind of like, what did I just read? Like, what was this? So, it was entertaining. I enjoyed it. It was super easy to read. The writing style was very enjoyable. And then I realized at the end, so what it felt like is you're at a party and you're kind of a fly on the wall, we'll say, and you go by and you can hear what people are thinking as you walk by them or as you fly by them. And then you're just going around the room and you're checking on all the people and you're listening to what their thoughts are in their head, like, oh, I need to buy groceries, I need to go do this, I need to do this, did this happen, and ooh, hey, who's that? And like people gossiping about each other and focused on their own lives and the things that they have to do. And then you come back around and you hit the same people again for a second and a third time, and it's just, it was hilarious. So this book takes place in one day. So we're following the main character, which is Mrs. Clarissa Dalloway, as she is planning the details for the party that she is having that night, and all the people that she's meeting as she's going about her day, and we get the thoughts of those people and we get her thoughts, and it's just so much fun. I want to say it's kind of nonsensical, but it's not. I mean, it makes sense, but by the end you're just like, what did I just read? 4 stars. Loved it. So I wouldn't say there was really any main plot to the story, except that there was going to be Mrs. Dalloway is having a party. So the main plot is that Mrs. Clarissa Dalloway is having a party, and all these people are invited or not invited to the party. And all of the people that we meet, all of the thoughts that we get to see are either thinking of the party or Mrs. Dalloway. And this is a quaint story that is reminiscent of Jane Austen and Louisa May Alcott. Very well written, very interesting, a great palate cleanser book, super fun read. So overall, it ended up being a good reading month. There was pretty much only, let's see, 2 books that I didn't finish. One I didn't get to at all. The other one I was 50% of the way through, and I will finish that easily this month. It may push one of my other books off a little later than I want, but it was worth the read, so I'm glad I started it. How did you do on your TBR for February? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to find out what everybody else is reading and how you did, how many pages or how many books you read during the month, and how that might have compared to previous months. So please like, comment, and subscribe if you wanna, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any videos from me, and I will catch you next time. Bye.